Keanu Reeves entered the stage calmly, holding a letter nobody knew the contents of. Harvey smiled, expecting a common interaction, but something unexpected happened. As soon as Keanu read the last line, he stood up and walked off without saying a word. The audience froze in shock, while Steve just watched him with no reaction. The cameras captured every expression of disbelief, and murmurs began to grow among the spectators. Harvey remained motionless, jaw dropped, trying to process what had just occurred. The letter, though brief, had caused an immediate and definitive reaction, leaving everyone wondering what had been written. 3 hours earlier, backstage at the Family Feud studio in Burbank, Keanu had arrived alone. No publicist, no assistant, just him and a worn leather jacket that had seen better decades. The production assistant, a 23-year-old named Marcus from Pasadena, tried making small talk about the new Matrix rumors. Keanu nodded politely, but his eyes were somewhere else, somewhere darker. Steve's dressing room door was cracked open, gospel music leaking into the hallway. He was doing his pre-show ritual, talking to himself in the mirror, hyping himself up with affirmations his grandmother taught him back in Cleveland. The show was supposed to be light, a celebrity edition. Keanu promoting his indie film about a retired hitman finding redemption through pottery. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Now, if you're watching this unfold, and your heart is racing like mine was that night, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button below, because you're going to want to follow how this story ends. And drop a comment telling me what city or state you're watching from, because this moment connected people from Los Angeles to Lagos, from Toronto to Tokyo. Everyone wanted to know what was in that letter. The envelope had arrived at the studio that morning, plain, white, no return address, just Keanu's name written in handwriting that seemed to tremble on the paper. Security almost threw it away, standard protocol for unmarked mail, but something made the head of security, a former LAPD detective named Torres, pause. The weight was wrong, too light for anything dangerous, too deliberate for junk mail. He ran it through the scanner twice. Nothing but paper inside. When they handed it to Keanu in his dressing room, he stared at it for 7 minutes without opening it. The makeup artist, Linda, who'd worked in Hollywood for 30 years and seen everything from nervous breakdowns to marriage proposals, said she'd never seen someone look at an envelope with such complete dread. His hands didn't shake. That was the thing people remembered. Keanu's hands never shook, but his breathing changed. Shallow, controlled. Like a man preparing to diffuse something volatile. The show started normally. Steve came out with his signature energy, suit sharp enough to cut glass, that megawatt smile working overtime. The audience was hot, ready to laugh, ready to play along. Celebrity Family Feud was comfort food television. Nothing ever went wrong. By design. By carefully orchestrated design. Keanu's team was up against a group of comedians from Atlanta. The questions were softball. Name something you'd find in a bachelor's refrigerator. Name a reason someone might be late to their own wedding. The audience roared at every answer. Steve did his trademark stare into the camera when someone said something ridiculous. Everything was rhythm. Everything was safe. Then came the lightning round break, commercial time. 90 seconds where the magic deflated and reality crept back in. Steve walked over to Keanu, that natural host instinct to make his guest comfortable. They'd met before, years ago, at some charity event in Malibu that neither probably remembered clearly. But there was mutual respect. Two men who'd survived Hollywood by refusing to play its ugliest games. That's when Keanu pulled the letter from his jacket pocket. Steve's eyebrows lifted, curious but not concerned. Keanu's voice was quiet, almost apologetic. He said something the microphones didn't catch, but the cameras captured Steve's expression, shifting from casual interest to genuine confusion. Keanu asked if he could read it. On camera. When they came back from commercial, Steve looked at the producers in the booth. They shrugged. This was live television adjacent, taped but with minimal editing. Spontaneity was part of the brand. How bad could it be? It was Keanu Reeves, the man who gave millions to charity anonymously, who took pay cuts so crew members could get better wages, who rode the subway and gave up his seat to strangers. If Keanu wanted to read a letter, let him read a letter. The commercial break ended. Lights up. Steve introduced the moment with his natural charm, telling the audience that Keanu had something special to share. The crowd leaned in, expecting a heartwarming story about a fan or a tribute to a late friend. That's what you did on Family Feud. You made people feel good. Keanu stood. The letter looked small in his hands. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and began to read. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something the audience couldn't quite name. The letter started innocuously enough. A thank you. Gratitude for years of inspiration. Standard fan mail language. Then it shifted. The writer, whoever they were, described a moment, a specific moment. 14 years ago, a coffee shop in Vancouver. Early morning, rain hammering the windows. Keanu had been there, reading a script, drinking black coffee. The writer had been there too, sitting 3 tables away, planning their last day on Earth. The audience didn't understand yet. Steve's smile was still in place, but starting to freeze at the edges. The writer described how they'd watched Keanu for 45 minutes, how he'd been kind to the barista who'd messed up his order twice, how he'd left a tip that was probably more than the coffee cost, how he'd held the door for an elderly woman struggling with an umbrella. Small things, forgettable things. But the writer hadn't forgotten. They described how those 45 minutes changed a calculation, made them reconsider a decision that seemed absolute. Not because of anything Keanu said or did directly, but because watching someone move through the world with basic decency reminded them that decency still existed. That maybe the world wasn't entirely the dark place they'd convinced themselves it was. The letter said they'd walked out of that coffee shop, and instead of going to the bridge they'd planned to visit, they went home, called someone, started the long, ugly process of choosing to stay. Keanu's voice cracked on the next line, almost imperceptibly, but the microphones caught it. The letter writer said they'd spent 14 years rebuilding. Therapy, medication, small victories, relapses. More victories. They'd gotten married, had a kid, found work they didn't hate, built a life that felt worth protecting. Then 6 weeks ago, they'd received a diagnosis, the kind that comes with timelines and percentages that feel like science fiction until they're about you. The kind that makes you review every choice, every moment, every person who altered your trajectory. And they'd thought about that morning in Vancouver, about the stranger who didn't know he'd been watched, who didn't know his basic humanity had recalibrated someone's entire existence. The letter's final lines were simple. A thank you. An acknowledgement that Keanu would never have known about that morning if not for this letter. An expression of gratitude for 14 years that might not have happened. And then the closer, the part that made Keanu's face do something the cameras caught in brutal high definition. The writer wasn't asking for anything. Wasn't seeking a response or a meeting or validation. They just wanted Keanu to know that his existence, his simple presence in the world, had mattered in a way he could never have anticipated. And that soon, they'd be gone. But the ripple effect of that rainy Vancouver morning would continue in their child, in their spouse, in the countless small kindnesses they'd managed to pass forward. The letter ended with 8 words that detonated in the silence of that studio. Thank you for making me choose to stay. Keanu finished reading. The paper trembled now, just slightly. The audience was utterly silent. Steve Harvey, a man whose entire career was built on never being speechless, had no words. His mouth opened, but nothing emerged. Keanu folded the letter carefully, returned it to his pocket, and stood. He didn't look at Steve, didn't acknowledge the cameras or the audience or the confused producers frantically talking in his earpiece. He just walked. Straight across the stage, past the game board, through the curtain and out. Steve remained frozen for maybe 10 seconds, an eternity in television time. When he finally moved, it was to look directly into the camera, and his eyes were glistening in a way that had nothing to do with stage lights. Backstage, Keanu kept walking, past Marcus, the production assistant, who tried to ask if he was okay. Past Linda, the makeup artist, who instinctively reached out but pulled her hand back. Past security and catering and the entire infrastructure of television production. He walked out the back door into the parking lot, into the harsh Los Angeles afternoon sun, and stood there. Just stood there. Torres, the head of security, followed at a distance, not to intervene, but to make sure nobody else did. He recognized the look on Keanu's face. He'd seen it on officers after particularly brutal calls. After moments when the job reminded you that every person was carrying a story you couldn't see. After maybe 5 minutes, Keanu pulled out his phone, made a call, spoke quietly for several minutes. Then he turned around and walked back inside. The show didn't continue taping that day. Steve had called it. The audience was released with NDAs and confused expressions. The footage was locked in legal limbo, while lawyers debated privacy concerns, consent issues, the ethics of broadcasting someone's deeply personal revelation, even if they'd chosen to make it public. But phones had been out, audience members filming despite the rules. Within 2 hours, shaky vertical videos were circulating online. By evening, it was trending globally. People dissecting every frame, every expression, every second of Keanu's face as he read those words. The think pieces started immediately, about parasocial relationships and the weight of fame and whether celebrities owe us anything beyond their work, about the invisible ways we affect each other, about the people we save without ever knowing we saved them. 3 days later, Keanu released a statement through his team. It was brief. He thanked the letter writer for their courage in sharing something so personal. He acknowledged that he had no memory of that Vancouver morning, which made the letter's impact even more profound. He asked for privacy for the writer's family, and he added something unexpected. He said he'd been in Vancouver 14 years ago, filming a project that fell apart. He'd been depressed about it, questioning his career choices, wondering if any of it mattered. That morning in the coffee shop, he'd been sitting there trying to decide whether to quit acting entirely, whether his work meant anything to anyone. The universe, he wrote, had apparently answered that question in a way he could never have imagined. Steve Harvey addressed it on his radio show a week later. He didn't play it for laughs, didn't do his usual shtick. He talked about being a Christian, about believing in divine timing, about how we're all connected in ways we can't comprehend. He got emotional, his voice thick with something real and unpolished. He said he'd been doing television for decades and had never experienced a moment that reminded him so viscerally why stories matter, why bearing witness to each other's humanity matters. The letter writer's identity was never publicly confirmed. Speculation ran wild, but no credible confirmation ever emerged. Some people claimed it was a hoax, manufactured for publicity, but anyone who watched Keanu's face in those final seconds of reading knew better. You can't fake that kind of devastation and gratitude existing simultaneously. The episode never aired, but it didn't need to. The moment had already escaped its container, spread across every platform, been translated into dozens of languages. People shared their own stories of strangers who'd altered their paths without knowing. Small kindnesses that had massive consequences. The butterfly effect of basic human decency. In Seattle, a barista named Jordan started leaving encouraging notes in random coffee cups. In Mumbai, a teacher named Priya began a practice of genuinely complimenting one student per day, even the difficult ones. In São Paulo, a subway worker named Carlos made eye contact and smiled at every passenger during his shift. Tiny interventions, unmeasurable ripples. 6 months later, Keanu was filming in Toronto. Between takes, he stopped at a small bookshop near the set. The owner, an older woman named Margaret, recognized him but didn't make a fuss. As he was leaving, she handed him a book, said it was on the house. He tried to pay, but she refused. As he walked out, he opened it. Inside the cover, she'd written a note. It said she'd seen the video, that 20 years ago her son had been in a dark place, that a stranger in a grocery store parking lot had helped him carry bags to his car and made a joke that made him laugh for the first time in weeks, that her son was now a physician, married, happy, that she'd never found that stranger to say thank you. So she was saying it to Keanu instead, on behalf of everyone who'd been saved by someone who never knew they were drowning. Keanu stood outside that bookshop for a long time. Then he went back inside and talked with Margaret for 2 hours. No cameras, no audience, just two people acknowledging the impossible, beautiful, terrifying truth that we're all walking around saving and being saved by each other constantly, an invisible network of grace that we only occasionally glimpse. The book she gave him was poetry. Mary Oliver. The page she'd marked had a line about paying attention, about the wild and precious nature of existence. Keanu carried it with him for the rest of the shoot, reading it in his trailer between scenes. When reporters asked him about the Steve Harvey incident at press junkets, he deflected gently, said some moments weren't meant to be explained, only experienced, that he hoped anyone watching would take away the simple truth that kindness costs nothing and might mean everything. Steve Harvey eventually addressed it one more time on a late-night interview show. The host asked if he'd ever gotten closure on what happened that day. Steve smiled, that genuine smile that wasn't for cameras, and said some things don't need closure. Some things need to stay open, to keep teaching us, to keep reminding us that we're part of something larger than our individual narratives. The letter itself, the physical object, was never seen again. Keanu never disclosed what he did with it. Some speculated he destroyed it, too personal to keep. Others thought maybe he kept it somewhere private, a reminder on difficult days. The truth, like so many truths, remained known only to him, but the impact was measurable. Charities focused on intervention work saw donation spikes, kindness challenge hashtags trended. Schools incorporated lessons about invisible impact into their curricula. It became a cultural touchstone, referenced in think pieces and sermons and TED Talks and therapy sessions. Because ultimately, the story wasn't about Keanu Reeves or Steve Harvey or even the letter writer. It was about the rest of us. About every person who'd ever wondered if they mattered, if their small actions counted, if being decent in an often indecent world made any difference at all. The answer, delivered in the most unexpected way on a game show set in Burbank on an otherwise ordinary afternoon, was yes. It always had been yes. We just needed to be reminded.